All right, so I would not consider myself actually a bee expert. But what I did at my property when I first moved in was I made it bee friendly and changed the plants I had. Really, I wanted to garden for bees, birds, and insects of any kind, and butterflies, and that's exactly what I get. On my little property, I have like 26 species of bees that I know about, and it took 7 years to get them all. And some of them were there already. So bees are not really easy to identify. They don't just sit there waiting for you to count all the little cells in their wings and stuff like that. So, yep, I forgot. Am I on now? Is this good? Is it on? Yeah. Okay. All right. So mostly I'm going to be talking about native bees because I'm not really that interested in non-native bees. If you want to raise honeybees, you go right ahead. They're not as efficient pollinators as our native bees. There's nothing wrong with them. Really. So 300 species of native bees in Connecticut. Most are non-social. They're not aggressive. They're not making a nest. They're not nesting together, with a few exceptions. So they're not really a problem as far as stinging us or anything like that. Some are very specific about the plants or families of plants they will visit. And others, like bumblebees, don't really care what it is. If it has nectar or pollen, they're happy. So we have declines in just insects overall globally, by the way, 45% decline in biomass of insects globally, 5% a year. It's not a good sign. Bees are right in there with the group. So they think mostly it's habitat loss. Just think about your habitat. When you bulldoze a property for a house, nothing that was growing there supporting anything is put back. Is it? Usually not. So they don't have food, and a lot of our native bees are so small, they don't have much of a range more than a few hundred feet. So they're done. So we want to try to protect the habitat if we can. It's the best way to help them out. So this is just Andrena vicina bee. It loves blueberries. Certain crops that we have here have very specialized bees that visit it. Blueberries have to have the pollen shaken, just like your tomato, peppers, any kind of solanaceous plant. So bumblebees are really good at that, and so is a couple of butterflies actually, like the eastern pine elfin, can actually shake the blueberry and release the pollen. So our native bees spend time there. That's why they're more effective pollinators. Honeybees are good pollinators. They just don't spend the time that our native bees do. So we'd like to encourage trying to maintain our native plants, but really bees don't care if it's native or not. But here's what happens. Japanese barberry, you ever see that? That was a plant that was supposed to be abolished like 20 years ago, but it made too much money. So, and that happens to be kind of near Gillette Castle. The woods are just riddled with it. What happens is it crowds out other native plants, like blueberry would be there, huckleberry would be there. You'd have viburnums in there and other things for bees and birds as well. And you're going to get nothing in there. That's barberry. But here's the thing. So you have garlic mustard, should be blooming any time now. Mustard should be blooming now. Autumn olive and Japanese barberry. Wherever you go and see this stuff, there's all kinds of bees on it. Are they to blame for spreading? You know, I just say that. They visit the flowers. Gosh, if I was a bee, I'd go to autumn olive. You ever smell it? It's just so fragrant. Can't blame the bees. So we want to look at native and non-native plants. We're going to look at them later after we look at the bees themselves. Why natives are important, though, is their flowering times coincide with the activity of our native bees. So they're vital for bee survival, at least for our native bees. Right now, what's flowering now? Spicebush. You'll see that. Willows kind of going by in a way. Viburnums are just starting. Blueberries are going to start anytime now, dogwoods and whatnot. But you can also plant non-native plants that also coincide with bee activity, and bees are going to be happy with that. So non-natives are not the end-all here, by any means. So here's just an example. Japanese Andromeda is blooming right now, and there's all different cultivars. They kind of follow each other. Happy Valentine, matter of fact, is one of the later ones to bloom. I need these on my property. I have a couple of small willows. I can't have too many because of piping problems, but I'll have the native willows. Clematis inequalis is a ground nesting bee that's out as early as February sometimes. They kind of coincide when our native willows are blooming, and that's about all that's out at the time. But if you put some of the older Pieris japonica, Japanese Andromeda, especially the white ones, those coincide with the willows, and they bloom for a long period of time. So my neighbor happened to have one right next door, so that's where the bees go when my willows are pokey or all done. And I have bloodroot also as well. I have it in different sections of my property, so some of it's already going by, some of it's just starting, and some of it will start in a couple of weeks. So you can kind of keep it going that way. Here's, I don't know if any of you have ever seen trailing arbutus or round-lobed hepatica. So queen bees that overwinter need to go on something. These are in woodland areas, very specific areas. You cannot transplant. Trailing arbutus is like the pink lady slippers. There's a fungus in the ground that if you just try to dig that up and move it, you kill it. And I know places where I can find both of those. One in Manchester is in such a tight area in the woods, if you went 10 yards beside it, you'd miss it. But here's an interesting spot. This is a power line. These used to be the most diverse places to find birds, animals, or anything. So on this spot right here, you get native plants, but you also get non-native. People think Queen Anne's lace is native. It is not. It was brought over here. So was yarrow. But they naturalized. But bees love both of those plants. In this area here, though, there's jewelweed, blue vervain, asters, goldenrods, nodding ladies' tresses, all kinds of plants, clovers for bees. So they kind of coincide. All of them get along and support bees there. But here's just some of the bees that you can find there. That's just the tip of the iceberg, really. Those are just the ones I found there. And there's a power line there that actually has a wetland on it. On the right, there's tons of huckleberry here, blueberry, dewberry, and raspberry. And certain bees love that, especially that's a carpenter bee, actually, on huckleberry. And then they have blue curls. Blue curls are a native plant that love just soils that are so bad, you'd think, what can grow there besides nothing? And blue curls will grow on it. And bumblebees love those plants. Just go on a roadside. I challenge you to pull over carefully after putting your signal on and trying to find a good spot. Anywhere you see flowers, usually you're going to find some kind of bees, and sometimes they may be just bees there that you're not going to see someplace else, just because the plants are so specialized. Lower right's a golf course. We have, gosh, probably 35 species of bees there. Here's the front of our clubhouse. We planted native swamp azaleas there. We have native viburnums there. We have rhododendrons, azaleas. And every year we have certain annuals, usually a salvia of some type. Lantana is another one. We have all kinds of bees there. And then we have hydrangea paniculata, which is the tree hydrangea, blooms late. We have bees from now on until frost usually. And then we put mums in, so we get them there on that too. This is an airline trail. I drag my sister with me everywhere, looking for birds and whatnot. All kinds of bees and birds and beavers are on this trail here. So what we do is we go down like once a month because different things flower. And we just find all kinds of wildflowers there. And here on this stretch here are chokeberry, blueberry, red maples, of course, closed gentians later in the year, turtlehead, of course, beard tongue later on in the woods, all those flowers, plus non-native. And there's just some of them there. It actually has Lonicera dioica, limber honeysuckle there, which you hardly ever see. It's native. But here's a section of the woodland trail there. See on both sides, there's like a little ditch there. So it's always kind of damp. That's Geranium maculatum, our native geranium. It's just, it goes for like 75 yards. And when you go there, there they are there. All kinds of butterflies and bees are on those, because there are bees that like woodlands. Solitary nesting bees, we'll talk about those a little bit. So each female creates a nest, usually with one egg in it. So she may end up making a lot of nests, or just one in a tube or something, but there's different cells in there. They don't tend to return except sometimes to overwinter, but usually they don't. Sometimes they have aggregations like the Clematis that we'll look at, but they're just sharing the site because it's good for them, that's all. And they don't defend the nest. Once they lay the eggs, they're gone. They don't go back. It's poor mothering.
Yes.
But they provision it with like balls of pollen and nectar that last just long enough to support that little larva in there. So,
Could I ask a question at this point, or would you rather?
Go ahead.
When the after the bees have laid their eggs and move on, you said sometimes they overwinter there. Are they overwintering near wherever it is that they are laying the eggs?
Yeah, they don't usually go too far.
Okay.
Yeah, bumblebees really travel the furthest. But if they're around, they're not going to go that far away, really. So here's their nesting chamber like this. You'll see a little mound of soil. You almost think it's an anthill. Usually they like sandy soil, and then they go way down, and they make way down here is one little cell. So she'll bring a pollen clump there. Sometimes they spit a little nectar on it and lay an egg on it. So their larva stays in there, pupates in there, and comes out the exact same time of year next year that the adult came out this year. So it's a yearly process. So there is Clematis inequalis. Sometimes we get calls from people, and they just have thousands of these little bees, and they usually fly pretty low. They don't sting. You can walk right through them. I mean, seriously. But these happen to be on a golf course, and they wanted them dead. But we just put up signs, and we said they're native. They're not going to sting you. Just be careful. If you're allergic to bees, don't go in there.
And how long, are they going to be there, what, a month or so?
Not even. No, they're gone. And then you can just mow over that. See, you're not mowing your grass yet, I hope, in March. Anyhow, this year, you probably barely got started on it, and they're all done. And then you can close up the hole. It doesn't really matter, because the larva can dig their way out as an adult next year. Well, it'll be an adult then. So here's the Clematis inequalis. It's called the little handsome bee. There it is on willow, but it'll also go to red maples. Red maples are like one of our first trees to bloom. And red maples, even though they're wind pollinated bees, they have a little bit of nectar for bees on them. So this year they came out, I'd say late March. Last year they came out 3 weeks before willows bloomed. It was like, I don't know what they're doing, because there is nothing for them. But they rest, I guess. So they like shrubby willows, maples, redbuds. Redbuds should be blooming this week, probably. All those plants there. But also bluets. You'll see these right now. Bluets are out. Sometimes you get a huge area of them. And if they happen to be on your lawn, try not to mow them for a while until you have to mow your grass. Violets as well support Clematis. And here's just a patch at the golf course we have of bluets. What's interesting is we had a few. We didn't mow this area for about 2 years, and look at them all now. So that's actually, it's out of play, who cares? And you don't think about that. See, you have a good excuse for having a weedy lawn, because all kinds of bees and pollinators and syrphid flies will go on that. Even some pollinating beetles will go on dandelions. It's not why they have them, but they could say they did. And that's how docile Clematis is. You can just have it walk on your finger and it'll just do that and be on its way. This is an Andrini, probably Nasonii. It's hard to say. I asked Kim Stoner to idea at the ag station, and she thought it might be that. Again, these are active very early as well, but see all the hairs on that body? That denotes that bee is a digger. She nests under, usually under shrubs. It could be along a wood line. This happened to be at the golf course. We dug up a shrub early, and the bee must have just emerged as an adult in the ground, hadn't come out yet. And when we pulled the shrub out, this little bee just came tumbling out, and it was like, wow, where am I? So I just put it on my finger, and we had to put it to the side while we got that shrub out, replanted a new one, and then we just kind of put it back. We didn't put it under the ground or anything because she was ready to go. But that was obviously a female there. But again, docile. Of course, she was Logie. And there's just head-on view. Hairy all over because they push us dirt with their heads. But I had, look on raspberries if you grow them. Gosh, a lot of bees like that, but especially Andrina bees. And anyway, they'll visit sumac as well and other things. But on my property, I have the miserable mining bee. And I don't know how that got its name at all, but here's the male here. It actually has charged hairs that attract pollen to it, which is interesting because when you think the female would have it, but they don't. So here's the female here, and usually you can tell these bees because she has these two lines of hairs on her head that go downward, and no other bees really have that. That happened to be at my house. But they love early plants as well. But so they'd be out around the time spice bush is blooming and Cornell pink. You know, the early azaleas, they're really a rhododendron, but whatever. They're out right now. That's the first one to bloom. They'll be out about that time. So sometimes just knowing that, you can go along a woodland area that's kind of damp, look on spice bush, see what kind of bees you see there. But here it is on my New Jersey tea, which is a native plant. And it stays that big. If you have deer, don't get it, just so you know. They like it, so yeah. So green metallic sweat bees, this is the Helicity bees. Females can be all green or not. They carry pollen on their scopa on their legs. Second largest families of bees. Most of them go on just about anything, but a lot of them really like Echinacea or Rudbeckia, where they can just poke along the flower heads. They're so tiny they can get in there. So they're about 1/4 inch to 3/4 inch tops. So they're very, very tiny. That happens to be the silky Agapostemon sericius. They're active all year. They'll start early, have a generation, then they have a second. So then you have them later on in the year. And this happened to be a female that was on goldenrod. But they love the Agastache, hyssop, Echinacea, butterfly weed. And here's the bicolored Agapostemon virescens. There's the male, notice, doesn't have hairs on his legs. He's not collecting anything. He's just eating. This is the female, and she will have the hairs there. This is one of the few bees that pollinates American white water lilies. There are also beetles that pollinate that. And here's a female active late in the year on, I think it's Helenium, but notice loaded with pollen there. And here's one on Echinacea, but see what I mean, how they can just poke among those flowers where a big bumblebee is kind of stuck on the top. And if it's a short-tongued bee, it's done. You can't get to anything. And here's a male on a native aster. That's how long they're out. And there's one on a mum. So you can't discount mums late in the year because honeybees are still out. Bumblebees for sure are out, and these little guys are out too. This is the Ligated Sweat Bee. The only reason I wanted to show you this is they're very, very tiny. They're generalists. You can find them just about on anything, really. But notice how big their head is. So if you see a little tiny bee with a big head, it kind of looks ant-like. It's probably this bee right here. And here's the pure golden green sweat bee. Sometimes it can appear golden, sometimes green, depends how the light hits it. So they're all green or all goldish. They love daisy family plants, they love asters, they like goldenrods, coreopsis, rose family plants, any of them they don't mind. Again, these are very tiny, I'd say about 1/4 inch. But they make their nests under loose bark on logs. And you can see this nest right there. She's kind of tending to it there. Then they just glue everything together. The reason they do that is because, let's just say they're on a trunk of a tree. You know carpenter ants, right? Did you know all ants are predatory? They like sugar too, but they like to feed their young protein. So when you see them running up and down tree trunks, let's say, or on a log, because they will, you'll find carpenter bees or carpenter ants on there. They will actually eat these guys, the eggs and whatnot. So when she glues it together, they can't even get through it, and they have no sense that egg mass is even there. And that's just a closer picture of it there. So some of the bees that use holes, hollow or pithy stems or tubes, you can get houses like that. I don't recommend getting too many of them, and always seal the ends of the tubes. Seal one end. They don't like two open ends. I jam them in mud if I use them. But here it is in a pithy stem of probably, looks like a hydrangea stem. You just see the little rear end. The female just goes in and removes all the pith in there, makes little cells and stacks them like that, divides them, and each little larva has its own little ball of pollen. Yeah, I'll show you one later that we got at the office. So mason bees, these are the Osmium bees. They're megachilies. They plug one end with mud. 2 or 3 females can pollinate an apple tree. That's pretty good if you consider an apple tree, how big it is and how many blooms it has. That's why they're such good little pollinators. They're actually managed bees, and so are the blue orchard bees. I believe they take these out to California also to pollinate almonds out there. But these are really good for pollinating our fruit crops. This is a stout bee too. And that was on a crocus of all things. So if you want to help these guys, try shadbush. That's amelanchier. That's a native plant just blooming right now. Redbuds, oaks, any of these, beach plum, beard tongue even, caneberries. This is a red osmium bee. This happened to be on my crabapple. Doesn't it look like Wilford Brimley? The males have a little mustache. You'll find that with certain bee species, the males have like this really striking mustache on them. Usually found in apple and crab apples. These are the ones, they can't really travel that far. 200 to 300 feet is about it. This is why if they lose their territory, they're kind of stuck. And again, they're stout. And she'll carry the pollen on her abdomen there. So these are fruit bees. So this is a sample we got at our office one day. A lady was cutting down shrub hydrangeas, kind of at the wrong time of year, so that's why they don't flower. But she said, I see these little maggots in these branches, so she brought them in, and it was, she just happened to split one of them. And we saw these little larvae in there, and I could see why can you see why she would be unnerved by that? and they were kind of wiggling around. By the time she brought it in, this was pupated. This was just pupated. This was still lapping around, and that was a female that had come out. So, yep. But that's a tiny bee, by the way. And it's a type of Carpenter bee, but it's a Serratina, very tiny. And here's one that's out on Kudo's coral hyssop that happened to bloom into November. In 2018, it stayed warm really late, and these little bees are still out, which is kind of unusual. And Hylaeus are yellow-faced bees, or mass bees, they call them. Sometimes they have white markings on it. You know, by the time you see the markings on the face, they're gone. So it's really hard to identify them. You just try to get a picture and do the best you can to identify it, or just enjoy them when you see them. That's how small they are, though. Very tiny. And that just happened to be on my hand for scale. So these females don't collect pollen on any kind of hairs. They swallow it. And they'll combine it with nectar, and then they just chuck it out for their little nests. They have a crop, so that's unusual also. You'd never be able to tell by looking at it. See, there's no hairs on that bee. You couldn't collect anything. What they really like, they're out about the time swamp milkweed is out, and then they can be out a little bit later when boneset and spotted joe pie weed are out as well. In the spring, they like golden alexanders, if you know any places that have those. Leafcutter bees, these are the ones that make holes on your leaves like that. It's not a weevil. It's just a perfect half circle. And then you see the bee there flying with it into her little hole, and they make like a tube in the hole, and then she'll start supplying that and lay an egg in there. So it'll look like this. You'll never see that. And you might see the end of the tube, and she might chew up a leaf, and it kind of looks like mud or something. But that's usually all you see. That happened to be a woman that, like the other lady, cut it and saw that in there. It wasn't as alarming, though. But I get megachilies. This was at my house. This is on bloodroot. They carry the pollen on their hairs, on the underside of their stomach. So my friend gave me, for the entomology class for the Master Gardener, she said, "Oh, Pam, I have this wood borer piece of wood. My husband was splitting wood, and it had 5 borer holes in it from beetles. And you can still see the frass in there. And when I would drive home in the afternoon, there were 5 bees on the side of my garage every day. And as soon as the garage door opened up, they went in. And I thought, well, okay, they're doing something in there. They are up to no good. And what it was I had left this piece of wood on the side of the garage, you know, up on the joists there. So it's 5 females, they each picked a hole. There were 5 holes in there, and they were using them to nest in. So when I took this block out just to get a picture of it, they followed me out. But they each had their own hole, and they use it every year. They just clear it out, so I just hang on to it. But I also had this happen. I was on my front porch, and I saw one of these megachile bees fly under my chair. And my friend, who does not like insects, did not see it. So I said, "Why don't you go get something to drink?" And I flipped the chair over, and I noticed the 2 holes in it. You know how they have holes in some of these chairs to let water out or whatnot? A little megachile bee had gone in there. She was making a nest in there. And I got her just as she came out. She could just barely squeeze through that hole, by the way. And probably nests there every year. Here's one at my sister's house. This was a megachile inermis. This is a huge bee for a megachile. It has very orange scopa there. It was just interesting to see it because you hardly ever see them. Melisodes, these are the long-haired bees, Eucerini tribe. So the males have really long antennae. You can't miss them. The females, not so much. but it doesn't matter. They have interesting eyes. They can be blue or green. And they love ironweed. And males actually patrol looking for mates. And see how her legs are white? That's because the pollen of ironweed is white. In bumblebees, oh yeah, very social bees. They'll be on just about anything. So the queens have to make a new colony every year. Mated queens survive. They hide out somewhere under a leaf litter, who knows where. They don't say. But these guys will visit just about any flower that has nectar or pollen. They're not that fussy. If they can get to it, they'll visit it. This happens to be a nesting site. This was in somebody's backyard, and it was in leaf litter. And they're not huge nests by any means. And really, they're still really not that aggressive if you walked right up to that. Not like a yellow jacket or something like that. I mean, I wouldn't press my luck. But they're just not as aggressive as wasps. But they'll go under rocks sometimes. If you have a little hole in your siding, they might go in there, but they don't use the same spot every year. Or they'll go in old bird nests. But here they are, milkweed, echinacea, this shrub dogwood there, butterfly bush. Butterfly bush, can't say enough good about it. All pollinators like that one. But the common eastern bumblebee, Bombus impatiens, is the most common one. It has like this little black mark right there, but there's other bumblebees that could have that, but these are kind of not real big. They're medium size. They often forage together with honeybees late in the year. They're not in decline like other bees. They're doing very well. Their activity coincides with lady slipper bloom. In lady slippers, this happens to be on a airline trail. There's hundreds of them in this one small area. And the bumblebees can get in the top of the lady slipper, but then they can't get out. So they're fumbling around in there looking for a way out. And while they're doing that, they're pollinating them. And what they have to do is blast through that slit right there. And sometimes they do, usually. Every now and then, though, you'll see a lady slipper, it's just moving. And you might want to just open it up and let her out. But it wouldn't be a male bee, because they're not out yet.
Pam,
Mhm.
just out of curiosity, when you go shopping for plants and there's like a zillion bees all over them, I've done that with, I don't know, autumn joy or.
Don't you feel bad?
Well, I can't decide what I should do. I'm trying to look at the plant and it's loaded with bees. And
They don't really bother you, though.
Well, the comment that I got was, they're so drunk with nectar, they won't even know you're there. And I said, are you sure? You know.
I wouldn't say they're drunk with nectar. It's not fermented, but they're not interested in you.
Didn't seem to be.
No, it's like a fly-catching bird. Fly-catching birds can almost land on your head. They're so intent on fly-catching, they don't know you're there, like waxwings, things like that. Same idea. Here they are on globe thistle. Can't say enough about that plant or any kind of allium, actually. Scutellaria, hyssop skullcap, that's a native plant. They can just kind of get in there. Brown-belted bumblebee, I've only seen one or two. These are supposed to be really common. If they are, I don't see that many of them. Maybe I'm just in the wrong place. They kind of emerge the same time as Bombus impatiens, but they love grassy fields, places like that, especially if they have milkweeds. Well, I'll show you what they look like. So that kind of looks like a Bombus impatiens in a way. But when you see the rear end here, on the abdomen, the first segment is yellow, the second one is like a rusty brown. And that's how you would tell that that is the brown-belted bumblebee. And that happens to be on spotted knapweed, which is also invasive. So they're supposed to be second to the Bombus impatiens in collecting more pollen grains than any other bee species. Looks like they also go on blueberry, huckleberry, things like that, crops. But they're ones, they really like milkweed because they can walk all over it. they don't like having to hover. They like to settle down and just trample stuff and get their pollen that way. I get perplexing bumblebee on my property, totally yellow bee. It's just a beautiful little bee, kind of picky, I would say. Every year on my property, it picks out like 3 plants, and that's about it. And one year it was gooseneck loosestrife, which I ripped out a lot of it. I had to save some for that bee. That happens to be on an aster. Here it is there. It was just kind of trying to get all the pollen off it on a raspberry leaf, I think it looks like there. So it's big, 1/2 to 4/5 of an inch, so that's pretty large. It's larger than our bombus impatiens. Again, they like to pollinate blueberries, gooseberries. Gooseberries should be blooming anytime, currant as well. But it looks kind of messy. It looks like it needs to be combed. And that happens to be on a butterfly bush there. They're just a gorgeous bee. You can't miss it. And there it is on sedum. And this is the golden northern bumblebee. You could kind of get it mixed up with the perplexing, except sometimes it may have that black band, sometimes it doesn't. They both kind of have a black rear segment on their abdomen. Other than that, you have to go by speed. These guys pollinate so fast, and they do it in the heat of the day. Entomologists have noticed them dying of exhaustion. And they do, they just hit. And you don't see them in the morning, you don't see them in the evening. Oh no, heat of the day. So we're just looking at some plants now, wetland pollinator plants. So if you go hiking or something, or if you have a little wet area at your house, I would try planting willows. Just look at them, but they're about done right now, I think. The weeping willow, I don't think it's started yet. Pinkster bloom azaleas, that's our native azalea. Sometimes you don't think bees go on them, but they do. Nodding ladies tresses, those are kind of late summer. Ironweed is later. Sabatia, you don't see much of that, but it'll be almost right in the water. In Virginia, meadow beauty, these are all really good wetland plants. I see them on power lines a lot, where there's just a little wet area where spring kind of stays there all year. Turtlehead's another one. Bumblebees just go right in there. And you'll see honeybees do the same thing sometimes. And there's the closed gentians. These are always on water, or practically in water late in the year, like September, October. They don't open. So the bees got to plow in there. And again, like the lady slipper, sometimes you see the flower moving. And if you peek inside, you might see a bumblebee in there, because they disappear. There's one there, just on its way in. It's a weird little flower. Asclepias incarnata, swamp milkweed, can't say enough good about that. Look at the bees on that one, plus butterflies like it. Clethra omnifolia, summer sweet pepper bush. This is so aromatic. If you had a pond or some kind of water feature like that, boy, I'd put some of that in, and you can smell it a mile away. Sometimes if you get too close, it doesn't smell so hot. It's almost too strong in a way. But boy, from a distance, it's really nice. But here's just some of the things I found on it, and that was on a power line. Plus a little gray hair streak butterfly as well. This happens to be a little brook by a dam that's since collapsed, and they can't replace it, which is good. So there's boneset, spotted joe pie weed, goldenrods, ironweed, all right there for bees. Has anybody ever seen bog goldenrod? It's kind of a beautiful plant. You can see the red stems from a distance. I've only ever seen it 2 places. This happens to be on a power line in Manchester. It's a nice plant, but there's the red stems there. but it'll be loaded with all kinds of pollinators late in summer. This happens to be, I don't know if you've ever seen salt marsh fleabane. This happened to be in Harkness Park. You kind of have to go off this little trail a little bit, and then it goes right through the swamp. You're not anywhere where you ought not be, but only in low tide can you get there. And bumblebees were all over that, and this was late in the year as well. So any kind of open areas, bloodroot, of course. Now this can grow in shade as well, but in nature I've seen it right out in the open with trilliums. Solomon seal and columbine, and hummingbirds like these both too, by the way. And Solomon seal should be popping in a couple weeks. Black Hall viburnum, these can get huge, but boy, whew, they're such a good plant for bees and birds later in the year with the berries on them. This one happens to be the biggest shrub I've ever seen. It was probably as tall as the ceiling, probably 15 feet wide. It's very, very old. Venus looking glass, sweet clover, sweet yellow clover, penstemon, and kalmia, all good for bees. This happens to be poke milkweed. If you've never seen it, the heads kind of dangle down. It kind of like shade. And this happens to be on the same airline trail where the lady slippers are. But these look like little ants, but they're tiny, tiny, tiny bees. So they're probably either osmia or maybe Ceratina. They're so tiny. And you couldn't really get a good look at them. They're so quick. But anyway, Joe Pye weed, goldenrods, and asters all bloom late in the year as well. Those are really good for bees. So if you saw that bee active on goldenrod late in the year, and it's a female, it's collecting pollen, you know it's second generation, right? Because she's collecting pollen to make a nest. So her young overwinter in the ground somewhere. Baptisia, we have Australis, and then we have Tinctoria. They're both native here, especially bad soils, like gravelly, sandy, awful soils. You can find those, like on power lines or roadsides sometimes. Mints, I would say one of the best plants for bees is mints, especially mountain mint, and especially muticum, the clustered mountain mint. I'd say that's the best. This over here is our only native spearmint. But these are what I get at my house. I get a wasp, I get that one, I get honeybees. What's funny in my property is I don't see a honeybee till mints are blooming. I don't know where they come from, because I'm nowhere near a hive. But they can fly a distance, but not until mountain mint blooms do they even bother to show up. So everybody does, actually. Even butterflies. Meadowsweet, the Spirea latifolia, this blooms July and August. There's also steeplebush, I think it's a little bit earlier. They like the same kind of open area, kind of like little waste areas. It's a nice plant, all kinds of pollinators on that. In sweet autumn clematis, if you want to hide something ugly and hideous, plant this plant. You cut it down to within an inch of its life, and it will just take over. It grows on like chain link fences. We hide one at work. You can't even see it. I mean, you can for a while. But bees are just all over that later in the year. And here it is this is Harkness Park again, near a swampy area. There's sweet autumn clematis just growing amongst the Joe Pye weed and the goldenrod. I mean, you could do that at your house if you had a little area, you didn't mind the look of that. Some people would find that messy. Witch hazel. Fall blooming one is more important than native. And that's when at my house, this is at least as tall as the ceiling. It'll bloom Thanksgiving, right up till then usually. I'd just like to point out northern catalpa. It's a native tree, but see the little nectaries on this? Bees can't see red, but they can see yellow. So these flowers are still good for nectar because you can see yellow on them. But later on, see how it turns red? A bee can't see that. So no bee is going to waste their time going to that flower. There's no sense anyway, the nectar's gone. Same thing happens with horse chestnut as well. Aronia can change the anther color. So when you see red, it's been pollinated or visited, there's no nectar there. It's just a point of interest. I like penstemon, hairy beard tongue. This happens to be on the same airline trail where the lady slipper was as well. There's just a little bit of it. You don't see a lot of it, I don't think. But it just has all these little hairs on it. Groundnut. I like this plant. It either smells good or it smells really bad. Yeah. Well, it's true. It must be the soil. Because when I found it years ago, I really thought it was fragrant, just the best ever. And now every time I see it, I wonder if there's something wrong with me. But I think it depends on the soil. But it's a vine. And this happened to be in a pollinator garden, and it was just crawling all over the place. But bees love that. And it's in the pea family. And there's a little bee just going in there. So non-native plants for bees, this is my back deck. I have annual purple salvia, like the rockin' fuchsia and the rockin' purple, black and blue. Bees love those. Hummingbirds like them. They get big. Hyssop and calamine. These will be loaded with bees from the time they start blooming up until frost. So those are really good plants to have. Crab apples. This is off of 85. They're going to pop any time now, but you'll see all kinds of bees on them. And about the time crab apples bloom is when hummingbirds come back. And hummingbirds will actually visit apple flowers as well. And cherries, ornamental cherries. Even though a lot of them don't fruit, they're still good for bees though. There's a bobo hydrangea paniculata. Here's a different one. We have these at the golf courses, loaded with bees late in the year, especially bumblebees and honeybees. And butterfly bush, yep. And butterfly bush is getting a bad rap. Did you know that? Because people say it's invasive. Not here. It's not invasive here. Nope. And I've heard the nectar's no good, and it's like, oh, then why are the hummingbirds on it? We must educate them. But I think that's pink delight. That's got the really big fat pink flowers on it. But any butterfly bush, it almost should be called bee bush, because I think you get more bees on it than butterflies, but you do get butterflies. And think about cosmos or sunflowers. You can start these from seed. They're so easy to grow. It's like you can put them in your pocket and they'll grow in there, like a willow stick or something. But later in the year, you got to start sunflowers like beginning August at the latest. And they'll start blooming in September, October, and there's still tons of bees out, especially bumblebees and honeybees are still out, and they'll be on that, as well as cosmos. And a lot of orchards plant cosmos, like in rows, with alyssum and other plants to attract bees. Because once the bees visit all their fruit trees, they give them something. Keep them there. And there's just a sunflower there. It happened to be in a cutting garden where there's all these cosmos there. We used to just go down there just to take pictures of all the bees down there. Veronica spicata, also good for bees. Annual red salvia as well. Any kind of salvia, obedient plant. This is one of my favorites, Caryopteris or bluebeard. It's a shrub. You do not cut it back in the fall, by the way. You wait until spring. When you start seeing growth, cut it back. Otherwise, you can wreck it. It gets quite large, but moundy. But it'll start blooming inside and then work its way up. And so many bees and butterflies and other kind of pollinators visit that. And there's a couple of cultivars out. Sedums. This happened to be at Yukon, a planting there. It's a very, very tiny one. That's a little megachile bee right there, and summer hair streak, it looks like. Stonecrop, sedum. Stonecrop is really good because it's flat-topped, and the bees can just kind of walk along on top of it. And then northern bush honeysuckle, I'd say this is my behind mountain mint and hyssop. This is my fourth favorite, would be this one. It's not a true honeysuckle, it's Diarvella lanicera. Not lanicera, because that would make it a honeysuckle, true honeysuckle. It gets these yellow flowers. Bumblebees love this plant, and you can deadhead it, and it will bloom again. You just keep doing it. There's 2 little bees at my house. That's the Agapostum and Pura there. Virescens there, I think. But here's what can happen. Drama out there. So I saw this poor little bumblebee, as if they don't have enough woes in the world. These are 2 spined soldier bugs. These are predatory stink bugs. They each had impaled this thing and were sucking its little guts out. But hey, they only eat 1 per molt, so this will be it for both of them. But see, things go on. These are cuckoo bees, nomada bees. Don't really have much hair on them. They're kind of small. They follow certain bees to their nest and lay their own egg in there, so they're kleptoparasitic. And when they're little, because they're so lazy, yeah, cuckoo bees, just like the cuckoo bird, all right? And then we have the jagged ambush bug. You'll see these on flowers just sitting there, especially goldenrods, yarrows. They kind of blend in. And it has big arms like Popeye. It uses to grab insects. And here it's caught a native bee, and it's sucking it right there. It's always something. So these are just my favorite plants for bees. You can have your own list if you like. I did have handout sheets, and we do have a fact sheet on our website. The ones with the stars are the ones I think are the most important, but gosh, it doesn't matter, really. But this is a really good bee book. Identifying bees really takes some tedious work. And a lot of times they'll tell you about the wing cells, and it's like, good luck with that. If they fold their wings, you can't see them. They don't just go like this and you want to look. Or try to, if you have a good camera, try to get a picture of the face, because a lot of times the markings are extremely important, or their mandibles, if they're big or if they're small or they're a certain way. Remember I told you the miserable Andrina bee has those 2 lines down the face. That would be almost diagnostic for that particular bee, but they're not all easy like that. But this is a really good book. And what I like about it, it does cover all of North America, but it has the map. So right away, if you think you found a bee and you see it's from California, you can just cross it off the list, because that ain't it. But then they talk about nesting sites, plants they like, when they're active, and things like that. I just think it's a really good book. And that's it. So.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.